What have Baptists contributed to the sciences?
How has science featured in Baptist missionary activity?
And how might Baptist theology shape how Baptists engage with science today?
My name's Tim Middleton, and I teach theology at Regent's Park College in Oxford.
And my name is Andy Goodliffe. I'm a lecturer in Baptist history at Regent's Park College as well.
In this series of short podcasts, we want to explore how Baptists past and present have engaged with the discoveries and practices of modern science. Is there something unique in the way that Baptists have tended to think about science? Are there good examples of Baptists who've been involved in the sciences? And is there any such thing as a specifically Baptist perspective on science and religion?
Today we're joined by Sarah Qidwai, a postdoctoral research associate at the University of York and an expert on colonialism and science. Sarah, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So in this series overall, we've been thinking about three figures in particular, William Carey, Ellen Farrer and Timothy Richard, whose interest in science was very closely linked to their missionary activity. And I was wondering if we could kick off by asking you, is this a kind of common pattern that we see amongst lots of missionaries? Or are these very isolated examples? What's the kind of wider context here, do you think?
Yeah, I think it was particularly common, particularly in the 18th and 19th century, for science and missionary activity to be intertwined. What I think is particular is it's Baptists. So normally when you think about missionaries in science, I think everybody just defaults to Jesuits. But what's interesting is there's so many different historical actors who are missionaries. And to kind of figure out what are their denominations and how does that influence their missionary work is quite fascinating. So as you've heard probably from Carey himself, having this press in Serampore is quite unique because it was Danish territory. And same thing with being in China or Ellen Farrer being a woman. They're all quite unique, but also part of a larger historical pattern when it comes to missionaries at large. Baptist, I would say there needs to be more work for them, but it's in the process.
And do you think that interest or use of science is partly tied because they're going to a place that is different from their home country and they're seeing something that they want to respond to it? And I guess that Western science they think can help in this situation or do something?
I think it's also a matter where both they see how their knowledge base can change where they are and also influence things. But a lot of it was also useful information. So technical knowledge based on agriculture, medicine that can heal bodies. So they are influenced by the local situation, particularly the languages, but they also bring their own knowledge set. And I always say this, I feel like the missionaries play sort of this third role. They're not really the collaborators of empire, nor are they the locals. They act as this third where, of course, their mission is evangelism. And they sort of, both with creating textbooks and dictionaries, end up helping the empire, but also they are serving the citizens of where they are. So I feel like there's this third category that missionaries occupy, and science sort of goes hand in hand with them. So it's not value neutral, but it also both helps them set up their missions. It helps in the context of empire, but also expands what our understanding of science is in the 19th century, because various disciplines are still forming.
So I'm wondering about how science features for these different missionaries and how it supported the goals they might have had. And I suspect maybe the answer is even that it's different for different people, right? Whether science is used as an evangelistic tool, whether it's seen as something that's important as a way of helping local people, whether it's important because that sense of kind of categorizing and naming is part of the colonial project. Can you tell us a little bit more about perhaps the diversity of ways in which science features for the missionaries?
Yeah, I think there were a few different ways that it affects it. So, think of medicine, where missionary doctors treated illnesses. There's also education, where they're introducing the scientific curricula, and often it opened up doors for others to convert. And then there's also the agriculture and technology. So teaching modern farming techniques or introducing tools improved the local economies, and it sort of showed good faith. But I think the big one was translation and linguistics. So scientific approaches to language that help them codify and translate local languages. And this also helped with the biblical translations. So there's a bunch of different whether it's scientific practice, scientific education, or applying science in the form of medicine, they're all different ways, and different historical actors have sort of engaged with those in that way.
You used the word help a number of times in that answer, which suggests this was a kind of a positive use of science for their wider mission goals. But were there also less positive, more kind of problems with the use of science or how they were doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the big one is the colonial entanglement. So missionary work was often tied to colonial expansion. So if you are, for example, let's take botany, you are measuring what is there and reporting it back. And the field of geography as well, mapping and measuring empire tells you what's there. So there are those colonial entanglements, and the dictionaries help with, the British Empire expanding. But there's also a sense of cultural imperialism where you're imposing a set of rules. For example, codifying grammar. So you have one language, and now you're using your own language to fit its systems into it. So the codification of languages would be a sort of cultural imperialism imposed through this. But the big thing, there's also power dynamics at play. So if they are in a position of authority, whether as a doctor or someone who's employing a translator, that also brings in this relationship of expertise and the community. And then, of course, using science is, what is using science? And there's a big discussion, is it value neutral or not? It's also developing at the time, and it's part of it. So while their intentions are to use it in a positive manner, the real dynamics end up being quite entangled, I would say.
Here at Regent's Park College, we have a portrait of William Carey, and in that portrait is also a young kind of Indian boy, I think, in that portrait, who we don't know who that person is. There's something also about, actually, we remember Carey, but we don't remember everyone around him.
Absolutely. I think we were talking about the dictionaries. There were obviously translators, pundits, people who did the typesetting. So there's so many unknown individuals who also contributed to building this knowledge base. And they've sort of been more than just a footnote to the historical record. So we have photos, we have what they produced, but sometimes they're just unnamed helpers. And I think just trying to reclaim them, there's a brilliant author who writes fiction about these figures. So what would be in this historical setting this person be doing? And I think that's a way to also just reclaim the authority of that through just fiction.
Okay, so I'm wondering if there's a possibility here that there's more than one type of science that we're talking about. So a lot of these missionaries are perhaps coming with what we might call a very Western view of science and trying to contribute, say, to kind of a Western understanding of botany by extracting the knowledge that's available. But do you find examples of the missionaries engaging with what we might call an indigenous conception of science, and how that knowledge is incorporated or ignored in this kind of conversation?
Absolutely. I think Timothy Richard would be an example of that in China, where there is traditional Chinese medicine. And in the example of India, you have Ayurveda, or you have the Hakims doing traditional medicine as well. And then what you end up seeing with the missionaries is they adapt to some of the local understandings and bring it out in their own work. What ends up happening is a lot of that information later on gets omitted. So there is this period where knowledge is used and infused. And that's why Carey and the Baptist Mission Press is so interesting. It's in this time period that's before the 1857 rebellions. So and again, because they're in Danish territory, they have freedom of the press. So they're able to establish themselves quite quickly and also engage with locals, but also with the Orientalists, because they were also printing the journal for the Asiatic Society and school curricula. So they had this cultural authority in a way that other missionaries didn't, just because they were outside of British territory. So there is an entanglement with local knowledge. How it's done does eventually get omitted because of just time and the 1857 rebellions bringing in a very particular view of British India and people who are interacting with it.
And so these Baptist missionaries who are engaging with science, did you see or have you caught any kind of sense of how theology was at play for them?
Yes, there is, I think, something unique about the Baptist experience. And I think one of the key takeaways is the collaborative engagement that they have. And they engage in science not only for apologetics or evangelism, but in collaboration with others in global challenges of the time. So you do see this sort of science for all approach where they want to make things accessible. They want to translate. The costs of things are really low. One of the reasons they go bankrupt. But I think there is something that's uniquely denominational about what they're doing. My experience is just with Carrie, but also with the work of Ellen and Timothy. I think you can see it as well when it's medicine or it's understanding the communities that they live in. So there are elements there, and I think further research needs to be done on other figures as well to sort of come towards a new understanding of what is distinctly Baptist about Baptist missionaries in the 19th century in science.
So thinking just a little bit then about how we might learn from this for today, are there lessons, good or bad, to be learned from how these missionaries were engaging with science that can inform how, say, a Baptist theologian or a Baptist preacher might like to think about science in a contemporary context?
Yeah, I think the first takeaway is it's complicated. You can't place our contemporary values systems on a past experience. And same way, we can't understand the things they're dealing with from the way we see the world. So if we go back to the 19th century, just take this for example, travel. It would take you 6 months to go from London to India, whereas right now we can get on a plane and be there in 10 hours. So I think it's that understanding of in this time period, the kinds of conversations, the kind of problems they have are unique to the situation. And they do occupy this third category of not indigenous and not imperial, but collaborating with empire, but also, I think, both subjugating, but also empowering some locals by giving them the way to build forward. So it's complicated, and I would hesitate to say any good or bad, but just say it's complex, and we need to study it further, and also understand that we need to focus on the locals and who they were and figure out how they're responding to these individuals and also those who convert, right? Because at the end of the day, it is a mission, and we do have records of that.
Thank you, Sarah, for just opening up our eyes and our ears, I guess we're on a podcast, to something of seeing these figures in a broader sense and a colonial sense of what's going on for them. Thank you for your contribution.
Thanks for having me today.
Thank you for listening and for joining us for this series of podcasts on Baptists and Science.
These podcasts are brought to you by the Centre for Baptist Studies at Regent's Park College, University of Oxford. They were funded by a Science for Seminaries grant from the ECLAS, Equipping Christian Leadership in an Age of Science project at Durham University.
The music is by Alan Kerry, and this episode was edited by Alan Kerry.